following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio streaming and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana Kersner, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health, using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This week, we're talking about stigma. And I don't just mean mental health stigma. I mean any kind of stigma that can negatively impact your mental health, including racial, gendered, religious, physical stigma, especially internalized stigma. Now, what is stigma? It's a negative attitude, belief, or behavior directed towards a person or group based on perceived differences such as mental illness, race, social status, and so on. It involves prejudice, which is like negative feelings or opinions, and discrimination, which is unfair treatment that often results in shame, social exclusion, and reduced opportunities for the person experiencing it. And the first problem I've noticed that when we talk about stigma, we don't define it. And so anything that makes someone feel bad is stigma. It's not. If somebody has issue with behavior, let's say they asked you to stop doing and you didn't, that is not stigma. Stigma is assuming you are going to do a behavior or are more likely to do a behavior, even if you hadn't done it, just because of you being a part of some group according to society, right? Now, then there's internalized stigma, also called self-stigma. And apologies, you may have heard ice rattling. I'm getting over a sinus and throat infection. I will try not to cough, but internalize or self-stigma. Now, this occurs when individuals with stigmatized conditions, mental illness, addiction, so on, absorb negative societal beliefs, applying them to themselves. You know, if it's like some stereotypes or true treatment about yourself, that might be self-stigma. This, can result in diminished self-esteem, hopelessness, reduced, productivity, reduced energy, and it can lead people to isolate themselves, feel ashamed, and very importantly, avoid seeking mental or physical health treatment, or even looking for a better job, or going to a job fair, or reaching out to government services or whatnot. And I can't believe I haven't done an episode on stigma before. But I, went to the archive, did an episode search, nothing in the titles of anything I've done previously, which is weird. I know I've talked about it. I guess I've just never dedicated an episode to it. Sometimes it's just the right time to address a given topic. And I decided to finally tackle this because of a conversation I had with a woman. I think she's young. I actually don't know how old she is. Last week. Now, what I'm about to describe is going to be rough because this woman was the victim of a sexual assault so brutal that it left her with a concussion, permanent jaw damage, and permanent bladder damage. Like I said, grisly. She's profoundly traumatized. She's terrified. But one of the first things she said to me was, "I'm not a perfect victim." And it broke my heart. It's still talking about this. It's sad. And, it's not just because I'm not a fan of perfect as a standard, top 10 phrase, stop trying to be perfect. Perfect is a lie. But because of the reasons that she believed, in her words, she's not a perfect victim. She has a great many things that make her credible. Clear signs of trauma, severe injuries documented by medical professionals, contemporaneous witnesses to back up that her story has remained consistent, and an attacker with a history of abuse and creepy behavior, at his job as, yes, it keeps getting worse, a college teaching assistant. Yeah, this guy has already jumped schools once to dodge allegations. And, because of the ongoing court proceedings, you can't name it. You don't want to affect the case. But knowing that people like this are out in the world, chilling. But, and like I said, it keeps getting better. It comes from money. And the victim is conservative in her politics, which should not matter. But in the court of public opinion, it does. Both of them are also into the BDSM lifestyle, which, again, should not matter in actual court. But, and I checked this because I couldn't believe it. It does. Because lawyers on all sides ignore case law in favor of deeply embedded social stigma about people who are into, like, kind of the painful, kinky stuff. And no, this isn't about any of the victims in the Jacob Hoggard case. That you can talk about. The former Headley singer, was convicted after trying to argue unsuccessfully that the assaults he was accused of were consensual rough play. And many victims advocates believe that the BDSM defense should just be, dead on arrival, inadmissible. And I know these cases drive my friends in the BDSM community up the blinking wall. And yeah, some of you might be shocked right now that I openly admit to having friends in that community, right? That's how stigma works. Why do I care what they do on their private time? It don't affect me. Now, some advocates have gone so far as to insist the laws be changed so that burden of proof is on the accused to prove that the victim agreed affirmatively to any violent acts in advance. I'm not sure that's going to get anywhere in our current political climate. The case law itself, like I said, it's not even the problem. Because the case law states that the assumption is that no reasonable person would consent to violence like that, causing serious permanent injuries. The problem, as I said, is that the case law often isn't followed. And this is when stigma gets very, very serious. And I want to be clear, this isn't about convicting someone of being weird, right? It's like, oh no, you just think he absolutely did it. You believe her because no. That's its own form of stigma. It's not right. Like I said, I have friends who identify as part of the BDSM community, right? Weird isn't automatically dangerous. I am super weird. And I've gone through that. Oh, she's weird. She doesn't do things the conventional way. She's dangerous. No. That's why I talk about going good crazy instead of saying sane. Because I have two conditions, PTSD and an autoimmune disease. Both these conditions are heavily, heavily stigmatized. And I've personally experienced, like I said, people leaning into the stereotype of people with PTSD being dangerous and people with autoimmune disease being liars or fakers, right? It's not fun. And women with disabilities are especially stigmatized. One marker of this stigma, one way we know how serious it is that women with disabilities, like the woman I spoke to that inspired this episode, are over 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than women without a disability. Bisexual women, Black women, and Indigenous women are also far more likely to be sexually assaulted than women not in one of these groups. And 20% of victims of sexual violence who are transgender, 20% of transgender sexual assault victims were assaulted because they are transgender. These statistics are grisly. Stigma is no joke. And yes, some people are like, oh, you're only talking about women. Well, yeah, the numbers still indicate that women are sexually assaulted at a rate 5 times that of men. But we know that could be because men don't report sexual assault as often since it's stigmatized as something that only happens to women, right? So if it happens to a man, he's weak and a laughingstock. Like, this is how stigma works. None of this is right. all of this is actively wrong. And I wish I could have assured this woman that women's organizations wouldn't treat conservative women any differently when they're a victim of a sex crime. But, violent crime. Sadly, I can't say that. I couldn't say that to her honestly. I'm too conservative for some activists to treat me with anything but vicious contempt. Yes, I was this week years old when I found out apparently it's fine that Jewish people in North York are being beat up on the way to synagogue or shot with pellet guns because of what's going on in the Middle East. Like, what? What? Yeah. No, it doesn't matter, as some people claim, what the politics of a given synagogue are. People don't deserve to be beat up, shot with everything, anything, due strictly to their opinions on foreign policy, right? This should be basic. But in this day and age where we don't just have people with whom we disagree, those people are evil and subhuman. It's not. And it's leaving, not just the Jewish community in serious fear, but I've talked to friends who are Arab, some who are Christian, some who are Muslim, and they're afraid too. Like, this has gotta stop. And by the way, I'm not a conservative. Anybody who's like, okay, she just mentioned trans people. How is she conservative? Yeah, right. No, I'm not. But some people believe that anyone to the right of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a fascist. This label of fascist, ironically, you guys have probably gotten hit with that at some point. It's treated as a permission structure for some people to behave like, well, fascists, functioning on centralized autocratic ideals, militarism, and engaging in forcible suppression of opposition while instituting a rigid social order, prioritizing the political group over the individual. That is what people do to fascists, right? But that, I just described fascism. I know. It's so ironic that Alanis Morissette should get residual money every time someone does it. That's still one of my favorite Alanis Morissette songs, even though it's really not about irony. Thank you, Mr. Connor, my high school English teacher, for using that song to teach what irony is and isn't. Shout out to Mr. Connor. He was amazing. Anyway, back to stigma. This is all stigma, right? You're a fascist, so I can treat you badly, right? Like, what? Your behavior is a reflection on you, not a reflection of the bad person. How you handle people you think are wrong and bad matters. And the way this stigma intersects with other factors, because Me Too is seen as so left-wing, conservative women and men are less likely to report serious, not like the little, oh, I didn't like a joke, serious sexual harassment and assault. Even though, get ready, hold on, these statistics, U.S. states with higher proportions of conservative votes are associated with higher reported cases of intimate partner violence, notably while the victim is pregnant. And that is according to the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. I sourced this stuff because I could not freaking believe what I was reading. And before you say, oh, serves them right, they're not, they don't have the right politics. Remember, some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims also identify as conservative women. And Jeffrey Epstein's victims were abused before they were old enough to vote. Did it serve them right when they were 14? And if you even hesitated to say no to that, that's how stigma works. You have such a negative view, and conservative women get it, especially badly because like, how could you, right? If you hesitated to say no, just because someone identifies conservative as an adult about things that happened to them as a child and whether they deserved it, that's how stigma works. And you might be realizing right now, this is pretty widespread, yeah? We all stereotype. Other people to greater or lesser degrees. We're probably rougher on ourselves than anyone else. And this is why we need to talk about it. We need to recognize this stuff, and we need to check our behavior, even if we can't control our immediate thoughts. So we are going to talk about stigma tonight with the hope that at least that one person going through a horrible time right now feels a bit more supportive. And I know that was a long opener, but I didn't know where to cut it without losing the plot. Right? So, okay, we're going to make up questions, comments, concerns, any feedback. Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my direct email, at nottherapyshow on social media. They had it coming. I like the Chicago song. Stigma, including internalized stigma, is a topic tonight. A heavy topic on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. I am not quite prepared to come back from this break, and we are still talking about stigma. Excuse my rustling. I'm just doing some timing on the fly. Stigma, including internalized stigma, because I'm hoping tonight's show will maybe prevent a few utterly awful incidents like the one I talked about off the top of the show from happening. You know, perhaps it'll help some people who aren't perfect victims either go to the police if they're being abused or at least get away from their abuser. You don't deserve it, whatever they say. And stigma is one of, you know, the hearts of abuse. Internalized shame can even be a driver of someone offending violently or reoffending as an abuser, especially in cases of child abuse. Experts on this know this. I've gone to the talks. I've seen the statistics, right? We don't like to talk about this stuff, but it's real. And of course, stigma and shame play major parts in the unacceptably high number of missing and murdered Aboriginal women, Indigenous women in Canada, as well as more negative outcomes for Indigenous people in our healthcare system. I couldn't find the stats to compare in Canada to the stuff in the US before the break, the stuff about intimate partner violence for pregnant by state. So, you know, I don't want it to seem like Canada's a utopia in this way. It's our treatment of our Indigenous population shows that's not true. And Black people, I see you too. Black women uniquely stigmatized in the healthcare system, especially in the areas of pain management and mental health. And it's so bad. People have such bad experiences that they won't go back, or they won't go in the first place because they saw too many friends and loved ones have terrible, terrible experiences. And those terrible experiences are real. Now, in theory, avoiding stigma is simple. Like, people should be judged on their behavior, not pieces of their identity, right? Simple. In practice, though, right? Judgments of a person's behavior, how serious it is, whether it's bad at all. Those judgments are skewed by pre-existing stigma. And people can even deflect and project the stigmatized parts of themselves onto other people. You know, if someone feels like society thinks they're inherently no good, terrible, bad, for instance, they may be quicker to jump to the conclusion that others are through and through bad. Terrible people exist in the world. Absolutely. I'm not Pollyannaing this. There's some evil stuff that I have seen. But that designation of terrible person is based on their behavior, not their identifiable characteristics. And ideally, everybody gets judged by the same set of standards. Yeah, okay, go ahead and laugh. That's not the world we live in. I knew it as I said it. Oh, cry a little if you want to, too. Crying can make you feel better. Yeah. Uh-huh. And stigma, it may start very young in life externally. We get messages reinforced as we go through life. But our participation in stigma, perpetuating stigma, begins within. Too many people walk around feeling intense shame, like they're inherently tarnished or evil or bad or broken, and this affects a person's ability to have empathy for others. These people spend a huge amount of time and energy suppressing the shame. It takes a huge amount of focus, which also they're, not applying that focus to other things, but it also results in a huge amount of psychological stress. Shame overwhelms other emotions. So the person can't feel what other people are feeling, that emotional or empathy, right? If you're around somebody sad, you feel a bit sad too, right? Shame overwhelms that. But it also negatively impacts perspective taking, that cognitive empathy, that ability to put yourself in another person's shoes in a compassionate way. So, shame isn't great for empathy for others. Shame means we make a lot of faulty and false assumptions of other people. Shame also fuels a need for self-protection, which results in or strengthens those cognitive distortions, those false assumptions that minimize, justify, or deny realizing the potential harms or the logical harms of your actions, right? A person who feels deep shame can also feel a lot of anger, distress, and resentment, which results in, deflection and projection, externalized blame. Sometimes this is referred to as humiliated fury. That's a heck of a term, humiliated fury. But, when I saw this in the research, I'm like, yeah, that's a good description of it. Humiliated fury. These people react to their own deeply ingrained feelings of worthlessness by lashing out at others. Take the corner of society known as the manosphere. Yeah, I'm going there. Talk to any of these guys for any length of time, and you get the feeling that they feel a deep sense of shame. But whenever you try to talk about it, whenever you try to, poke that even a little, it boomerangs, that shame boomerangs into some sort of externalized blame aimed at women, even though there are reasons why women don't get it or it's all women's fault. Stepping back, they don't make any objective sense. That's the thing. It's not about making sense. It's about venting the buildup of stress, anger, and resentment that are byproducts of deep, chronic shame. And you don't get this level of shame from thinking you've done a bad thing. No, this kind of shame only comes from feeling like you are a bad thing. It's the difference between failing at a task and, okay, I made a mistake, and feeling overall like a failure. And I've found that guys in the manosphere tend to feel like permanent, hopeless failures, no matter how much they externally posture, except for those grifters that make money off those guys by further wearing down their already weak self-esteem. There's a lot of people in the manosphere that way. But the guys that consume that content, the guys that cling to this toxic stuff as a lifeline, and some of them are aware that it's kind of toxic, but the shame keeps them stuck. And you might be asking right now, how does someone get this bad? We know some. We know some of how this process works. There are 3 general stages to internalize stigma, this kind of shame. The first step is agreeing with a negative stereotype. For instance, all men are naturally predators who want to hurt women, right? That's a negative stereotype that you agree with at least some level. And then if you're a man, you apply that negative stereotype to yourself, right? You're a man, so I'm a predator who wants to hurt women, and I don't even see it, you tell yourself, right? There's something about that. It's like, what? Then that cognitive dissonance, it creates a negative emotional response. Something like, no, I'm not a predator. I'm not. No, I know myself. It's the women. They're just gold digging sluts. And then it flips around to no woman will ever want me because I don't have enough money. It's not fair, right? Like, this is the loop, and I don't mean to mock. I'm just sort of remembering how it was expressed to me. Yes, people have voiced these opinions about women to me, and I'm left going, do they think I'm not a woman? Or do they think that I, too, am a gold-digging slut? Right? Okay, yeah. The impact of this internalized stigma is not just saying awkward things like that, right? The end result is a profound fatalism or nihilism, an attitude of why try? The problem, isn't just bad luck or past failures. The problem is an identity that they are a failure. It defines them. It's not just that they haven't succeeded yet. They don't believe that they can. And we're seeing this start in boys as young as 12. Now, of course, when these 12-year-olds' mothers catch them watching, I hate to even invoke his name, Andrew Tate videos, mom also experiences stigma and shame, something called family self-stigma, right? The cycle begins again. Negative stereotype. Oh God, she raised a misogynist. This negative stereotype. Misogynists have terrible mothers. Wait, my son's a misogynist. I must be a terrible mother. Applying it to herself, and then the negative emotional response. Like, no, I'm not a terrible mother. It's society that's wrong. It's society. It's the internet that's done that to my son. I have to sue everybody. I have to scream at people. And she ends up yelling at the only person to yell at, her kid, and blaming the content instead of trying to understand why her kid is watching it in the first place, because she doesn't need to understand, right? She's assuming he's watching it because on some level she's a bad mother. Internalized family stigma. It gets worse, though. Then the family hides this horrible, shameful secret. Bad mother, raised misogynist, right? And so they avoid getting the son appropriate treatment. He just needs discipline. He needs a firm hand, right? Not calmly talking to the kid, not listening to the kid. Maybe he has some insights. 12-year-olds can be pretty smart, and because they're just yelling at the kid, not listening, or talking to him, top 10 phrase, listen twice before you talk once, the kid's mental health declines. He gets depressed, withdraws from the world, and that lack of social support accelerates the decline in the kid's mental health. And the kid might get some sort of help sometime between the ages of, 15 and 16, when he gets taller and more muscular. So the system starts treating him precisely like that potential predator, that danger to the people around him. But that reason for intervention, that being the reason he finally gets some help, can make the stigma worse before it gets better. And this isn't just a normal, moody teenager. No, this is all preventable. Now, I can hear some of you saying, how do we prevent this, right? Like, how do that's not happen to my family. And if it's too late to prevent it, well, what do we do about it? I don't want this. Nobody wants this. There's a lot of talk now, especially in Canada, about the issues facing men and boys. And we have an opportunity to get this right. I'll talk about broad stroke stigma, not specifically men. I want to get an expert on that. But how stigma in general, what we can do about this after the next break. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my email. At nottherapyshow is how you can reach out to me, my social media manager, and me on social media. Stigma, the vicious cycle, when it internalizes, can be broken. I'll tell you how when we come back on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about stigma and internalized stigma. And before the break, I promised to tell you what to do if you realize you've got some internalized stigma going on and it's making you, well, let's say less than the best version of yourself. If the stigma you're dealing with is based on mental illness, you may want to Google the Internalized Stigma of Mental Illness, the ISMI scale. It's a series of 29 statements regarding living with a mental illness that you indicate, a level of agreement with, 1 being strongly disagree and 4 being strongly agree. Now, I don't recommend taking this without a therapist to take it to, but I get that some people can't afford therapy, can't access it, don't trust it. So please, at least have a supportive person to talk to about it. Don't dive into this alone, but it's still a good tool, especially if you do have a therapist. These inventories are great discussion points with your therapist because it's numeric. They can see it. It's all broken down. You can address the things that the internalized stigma of mental illness scale measures. Things like alienation, stereotype endorsement, perceived discrimination, and social withdrawal. And all this is in service of becoming more stigma resistant, right? And fighting stigma is one of the big reasons I started this show. I mean, I'm not the typical face or voice of someone with PTSD. And I know what people think about people with autoimmune diseases, though some celebrities are taking the really brave step of going public. Selena Gomez has lupus. She's been open about it. She continues to act. She's amazing on Only Murders in the Building, living with lupus. And Erin Moriarty, Starlight from The Boys. Erin Moriarty is her name as an actress. She has Graves' disease. And after a lot of speculation about what's going on with the way Starlight looks, well, autoimmune disease, right? That is rough. Graves is tough. And good for her for talking about it, for throwing off that shame and going, hey, this is just my reality. Lady Gaga has fibromyalgia, and that's a neurological disorder by classification, not an autoimmune disease. A lot of people think it's an autoimmune disease. It's actually like neurological. The pain sensors don't turn off. But yeah, like Lady Gaga has been part of this too. And it's very vulnerable to talk about this stuff, challenging negative stereotypes by painting a target on yourself, by saying, I have this thing, knowing people are going to take those cheap shots because it's easy and sometimes effective. That can be extremely hard, especially when you're dealing with those people who take those cheap shots. They're actively perpetuating this stuff, and people are cruel, that. But the fact that 21% to 47% of individuals with mental illness experience moderate to high levels of self-stigma, it's incredibly high numbers among Black populations, Black communities. And some of the people I found, just personally, some of the people who have highly stigmatized conditions themselves and have a lot of internalized stigma, they can be the absolute cruelest people out there to others who are just trying to live their lives with something they didn't ask for, And then there's the well-meaning, but, I'm sorry, frustrating people who try to anticipate what people like me are going to want and need instead of asking us. Oh, please don't do that. Every person is different. Don't assume that your friend with, say, bipolar 1 has the same needs as somebody else with bipolar 1. These aren't medical diagnoses in that they're a series of physical symptoms. They're overlapping, often not totally accurate names we give things to get people into treatment, most likely to be effective with certain types of conditions, though that's shifting all the time. The best science on that stuff. You got to do a lot of reading. That being said, and how I'm humbly proud of the anti-stigma work that this show and others like it and people like, Selena Gomez and Lady Gaga and Erin Moriarty do. There's 2 terms associated with this kind of work. And to be completely honest, I can't stand either of them. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying I personally don't like them, and I'd like to talk about why. And the first term is counter stereotyping, which simply means, keep this brief, deliberately going against stereotypes. And because I, grew up at Jane and Finch, there was a lot of discussion in the people around me about, shows in the 80s like The Cosby Show. Oh, God, I went there. Yeah, The Cosby Show. Back in the 80s. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Was that the 90s? Yeah. I mean, more recently, Blackish, shows about rich white people, rich, successful black people. Look, I automatically went, I stigma there. There you go. Freudian slip. What the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Blackish did that The Cosby Show didn't do was dealt with the tension inherent in being a model minority, right? No matter what single box you shove a group of people into, it's still a single box. And in order to reduce stigma, we need a plurality of identities that are valid. And characters like Jazz and on Fresh Prince and Charlie, was it Charlie? The friend, Dre's friend on Blackish. They're comic relief and they can lean into, certain negative stereotypes. But again, plurality of identities, everybody's got to be interesting and have flaws. And, even Dre on Blackish, the very close relationship with his mother, people could say that's stereotypical, but there's so much balance on that show that we're doing better. By the way, shout out to Sanford and Son. That show is still funny. Fun fact about Sanford and Son, like I believe the guy who played Lamont on that show just passed away recently. But Sanford and Son was an adaptation of a BBC show called Steptoe and Son. And the original was kind of an old school junk dealer with the son who wanted to be more like classy and kind of rise above his station. It was the same underlying conflict, which I find really interesting. Sanford and Son, still holds up. And there's a certain amount of characters like Lamont and characters like the kids on Blackish who, their parents worked real hard to give them better, and then they're sort of caught between two worlds. And peer support is very big in certain, marginalized communities. The Equalizer with Queen Latifah did a whole character where Delilah, Robin's daughter on the show, becomes a peer counselor. And I'm like, yeah, the same way I started doing it in school, right? Peer support is strongly connected to counter stereotyping, and that's why I can't stand it, right? I see so frequently how not wanting to be a stereotype just drives that stigma-induced shame deeper. And I mean, I'm a ginger kid. Yeah, evil, freak us out, right? Thanks, Cartman. If I was terribly worried about stereotypes, I'd be in chronic denial that I ever got angry. And that's the thing, even allegedly positive stereotypes can be hurtful. I mean, my East Asian and South Asian friends are like, we're not all good at math. I may be, but we're not all good at math. It's stuff like that. Just let people be people, please. Let people be individuals, just in general. It's not, whoa, you're not good at math. Stop that. Stop it. Stop. Right? And I have to stop for a commercial break. Hey, first decent segue of the show. We're almost done. Questions, comments, any feedback, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my email, at nottherapyshow on social media. When we come back, the other term related to the work I do regarding, stigma reduction that I absolutely cannot stand. It's a concept overall. Like I said, it's not bad. It works for some people. I just don't like it. Stay with me after the break. I'm going to get to it in our final moments. When we come back, talking stigma, resisting stigma, counter stigma, internalized stigma, all the stigs. When we come back on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. And we have 5 minutes left, give or take, to talk more about stigma, encountering stigma, and internalizing stigma, and all that good stuff, inspired by a woman I talked to who, went through a horrible victim of a violent, brutal crime. And the first thing she said to me was, I'm not a perfect victim. That's stigma, right? And I was talking before that, yes, even though this program has a heavy element of, stigma reduction, the work I do in the community is heavily focused on stigma reduction. I can't stand the jargon connected to stigma reduction. And we talked about counter stereotyping before that. You can't spend your entire life not being fully you because you're afraid of slipping and falling on a stereotype, right? The other term I absolutely can't stand. Personally, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these terms. I just don't like them myself. The second term, can't stand it, have to accept I exist, and people are going to use it, is empowerment. Especially self-empowerment. Now, to begin this, it's what does this mean? There are 3 different recognized psychological theories that broadly deal with how empowerment works. Meaning psychology can't really agree on what it is. So that's when you get into that territory of it's just vibes. And that's why I don't like it. You can't give yourself power. You can't. Power is granted to you by a system. You can claw it, you can grab every little bit of power you can. But if a system is going to go, no power for you particular type of person, you're not going to get it. Because of that, a lot of breath is wasted convincing individuals that they need to be empowered. They need to empower themselves. And the problem with empowering yourself is that takes the social task of distribution of power and dumps it in the individual's lap, setting them up to fail. Now, instead, we should be working to fix the system so the system sucks less. But hey, bitter moment here. People can't charge $1,500 a person for a workshop by fixing the system. There's a lot of grift in the empowerment space. I mean, that's the crossover with the manosphere thing I mentioned earlier, right? all this empowerment, all this self-esteem culture, right? Does anyone really feel better or more powerful after all of these years of alleged empowerment? I'm not seeing it. What the nonsense they call empowerment is really about is healthy boundaries. No, I will not accept this. Bye, and walk away. Yes, I am aware of the potential consequences of this action, and I am prepared to accept them and then do it. I have inherent worth because I am a human being, and I will not accept being treated like an object that you kick every time you have negative emotions. And then again, they start treating you like an object they kick every time they have a negative emotion, or even some of the time they have a negative emotion, you walk away. That is the power you have. Stuff like that. You only form a sense of self-worth. You only shed stigma if you treat yourself like you're worth something. If you don't treat yourself like you're worth something, no amount of empowerment from others is going to plug that hole of worthlessness. Top 10 friends, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. The world isn't fair, and we shouldn't be encouraging people to take stupid risks for the sake of lip service to empowerment. We should be giving people from all walks of life, no matter what their disability or challenge is, if they want to work, if they want to achieve something, if they want to have purpose, we should give them every chance possible to be reasonably successful and comfortable, no matter who they are. And yeah, easy to say, hard to do, right? That's the challenge. No amount of therapy is going to make someone feel good about themselves if everything inside them and around them is convincing them that they're bad. I work with people in their 40s who are still really badly damaged from bullying they were the victims of in their teens. These wounds cup deep, in part because people are too ashamed to admit to others that it still bothers them. And I'm out of time, we could talk about this more. I'll revisit in future weeks. We got something that's going to help next week. Hopefully I'll save the surprise in case it doesn't pan out. But Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my email. At nottherapyshow is my social media. Hope you enjoyed this show. It was rough, but hopefully you took something out of it. Set boundaries. Boundaries are great. They're tough at first, but other people don't have to like your boundaries. They do have to accept them. Top 10 phrase. So the most important thing is talk. Healthy self-esteem cannot exist without self-compassion. Top 10 phrase. And you're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. See you next time.